AEW and New Japan Pro Wrestling present Forbidden Door 2, the second annual Forbidden Door pay-per-view, where you have the best of Japan and the best of the U.S. going into, well, the U.S. and Canada. This was in Canada, Toronto, Canada. Going into this show, I almost wound up going to this show. I really tried to go there at one point, but I have something very important to do tomorrow, so I can't make it. Otherwise, I would have gone, because the two main events on this show, the double main event, were both matches that I really wanted to see last year. I went to Forbidden Door last year in Chicago, and my God, I had a good time, but they really jacked the price up on those tickets. But I had a good time, but I didn't get those matches last year, and I bought my ticket thinking I would get those matches. Or at least, Zack Sabre Jr. and Bryan Danielson. We didn't even get that. But this year, Bryan Danielson and Kazuchika Okada, my two favorite wrestlers of the past 15 years, headlined the show, along with Kenny Omega and Will Ospreay, the co-main event. Kenny Omega and Will Ospreay started off the year hot with their epic Tokyo Dome match, which I called the best match of the year at the time, even though the year was only 4 days old. I knew it would be hard to top, and so far it probably stayed there, even though that WrestleMania had a couple of really good contenders, and so did tonight. So I want to go through and give my thoughts on this pay-per-view. I want to say that one of the issues with this pay-per-view is that it was really easy to predict the winners. That's the only thing I would say is probably a detriment. The work was great. I mean, you have great wrestlers from both countries, or both companies, that is, working their asses off for this Toronto crowd. But the winners were pretty predictable. It's pretty easy to predict these. Now, there was one match that was advertised, but wound up not happening, and that's Filthy Tom Lawler against Adam Cole. That wound up not happening because Adam Cole has some kind of injury or some kind of illness. I think it was an illness. So Filthy Tom had to wrestle in a dark match that didn't even air on the 0 Hour pre-show. So on the 0 Hour pre-show, they had the Swerve Stable, Mogul Embassy defeating Chaos and Desperado. It was a fine match. It was probably the best pre-show match we got. They had Athena versus Billy Starks, which is a weird match because, Athena feels like the one, person who's been tasked with being on Ring of Honor, who has a lot of talent as far as the women's division goes. And you kind of feel bad for her because she wasn't used well in WWE for most of her career. And now in AEW, she's still not being used well. She kind of caught the short end of the stick on that one. But she is the Ring of Honor Women's Champion. That doesn't really matter that much. This was the Women's Owen Hart Tournament first round matchup. Then we had El Phantasmo against Stu Grayson. A little bit weird that they put Stu Grayson, of all the people in that company, Stu Grayson in this match. But again, you could predict who was going to win. I mean, it was pretty easy to figure that out. Then the show kicked off with the AEW World Title, MJF versus Hiroshi Tanahashi. This was actually a pretty fun little match. I think it worked to their strengths. MJF is, a very, very good character as far as being a heel, and Tanahashi has that sort of legendary status that, he's like John Cena, where he comes back to kind of lose to certain guys here and there and kind of elevate them, because he carried New Japan around the same time that Cena was carrying WWE, give or take a couple of years. It was around the same time. And they're both like the stars from like the last generation that still come around from time to time. Tanahashi still works in Japan frequently, more than Cena works in WWE. But he's all charisma. I mean, the guy has this weird sort of energy that he just has like that natural charisma that just comes out of every pore when I see him wrestle. And it was a good match, 15 minutes, and MJF wins. Actually, wait, hold on, let me go back. I forgot the last 0 Hour match. Oh, I forgot it. Los Ingobernables de Japón, Shingo, Bushi, and Takahashi beat United Empire. And that was like a pure New Japan 6-man match, and I enjoyed that one a lot, actually. So I think that was probably my favorite pre-show match. I'm my bad. It just totally went over my head, My apologies on that. So, get back to it here. MJF wins. Of course, this is going to lead to him talking trash because he does that, and these guys know how to draw that emotion. And they did the thing where it looked like Tanahashi actually had him beat, by doing the visual pin. But of course, what happened was MJF kind of shoves Tanahashi into the referee and then hits Tanahashi with the ring. So they brought that finish back to get the 1-2-3. So it's just that's how MJF wins his matches, and it is what it is. Now, CM Punk versus Satoshi Kojima was second on this show. This is for the Owen Hart tournament. Obviously, Punk's not going to lose his third match in the company. I think he's actually going to win the Owen Hart tournament. I'm pretty sure that he is the one that's going to win this thing because he's in it. So he's probably going to win it. And, the show, it's interesting because with Collision on Saturday and with this show, they're kind of testing the waters to see if Punk's going to get cheered outside of Chicago. Last week, he was very heavily cheered, but we knew that was going to happen in Chicago. And for All Out coming up later on this year, it's going to also be in the United Center. So again, he's going to get cheered. But outside of Chicago, little bit more of a mixed reaction. Some people did boo CM Punk. There were some fans. It was somewhat in the middle, I would say. But he definitely, if they want to turn CM Punk heel, maybe even after All Out or even before if you want to, I think that might be the right move, yo. I really do think it might be the right move. Now, with that being said, Kojima was a good opponent for him because Kojima kind of works a style. He's a legend, undoubtedly, and he's a great worker, but his style is a relatively basic style in comparison to some of the other guys that are at the top of New Japan, like Ospreay and Okada. Like, he works a very simple style. Now, with that being said, Punk won the match. This was a basic wrestling match. I feel like this match could headline any TV show. It felt like a good little TV match. Like, if this match were on, like, SmackDown, for example, it would have been fine. On this show, though, you have a bit bigger elevation because you've got so many great workers. So, obviously, it's easy to forget about it, but they still worked hard. And Kojima's kind of got that, he's kind of in that role. I wouldn't say he's where Tanahashi is because he doesn't have that same connection with the fans. But once again, here's a guy who has been in New Japan since the 90s. Like, he predates Tanahashi by a decade. And he's a guy who, you can always count on him to help him elevate new talent. And he's a simple enough worker that he can work with anybody. Like, he can work with anyone. So GTS 1, 2, 3, and then Punk helped Kojima to his feet. They had the respect thing. We'll see what happens, yo. This is the first show where Punk has been in the locker room with the Elite. Not obviously not at the same time, but I'm curious if there's any stories to come out of that. So the next match was for the AEW International title. Orange Cassidy was defending it against ROH Pure Champion Katsuyori Shibata, New Japan TV champion Zack Sabre, and Daniel Garcia. And the whole thing here was two of these guys I love. I love Shibata, even though whenever he takes a bump, I cringe. I mean, it's just the dude was out for a long time. He seems to be doing better, but still, you know what I'm talking about? And then I love Zack Sabre, obviously. Oh, I think Daniel Garcia, I think AEW made the mistake of over pushing him too soon, and it made me kind of lose, like, I wasn't really excited to see him, you know what I mean? And Orange Cassidy, dude, I'm tired of this guy. Look, I'm sorry. I know some of y'all love Orange Cassidy. This gimmick is played out. He's been doing this now for 4 years. The indie version of this, I think, worked, and it was also had a bit more variety. Yes, he's a good wrestler. I'm not saying he's not. He's talented, but this style, like, the whole, like, whoa, with the soft kicks and everything, to me, it's played out. Like, I think they really need to work on evolving his character to the next level. And I'm not saying to turn him heel or to totally change him up, but something has to happen to where he evolves. He's been kind of the same exact character now for years, and the carefree thing can work for a while, but I think it's long in the tooth. He wrestles on every single week on Dynamite, oftentimes opening the show, and I always kind of roll my eyes because, yeah, he can work. I mean, it's not like his matches are bad, but I'm just not into that style. I'm just not into it. It's just not for me. It just isn't for me. And that title just felt very, that belt, just creating that belt to me was weird. So we'll see where they go with it. The story here, though, is that Orange Cassidy's banged up. They're telling the story that he's had like 25 title defenses. He's all banged up. He's injured. Now, I'm sure he's actually banged up, but they're kind of playing it up as being part of the story. And the story is, how long can Orange Cassidy survive as champion before his body eventually gives out on him? And that is a good story. I actually like that story, but I also feel like it has to be soon. Like, he's got to drop that title soon, because you can't keep this going till August. You got to have him drop it soon. So maybe it'll be Garcia. I don't know. Sonata versus Jungle Boy for the IWGP Heavyweight title. Early on in the show, it went on. The match was a little weird because even though I know that AEW sees Jungle Boy Jack Perry as being their future, I feel like whenever I see guys like him and Darby, I think that they're just not going to get past where they're at. Now, they might. I'm not saying that I don't think they will. I'm saying it feels like they're kind of stuck here. But they did do some stuff, and I'm going to get to it here with this match. That was interesting. It was a fine match, although for an IWGP World Title match, it was a disappointment. Like, you have to understand, when you're the IWGP champion, for the past like 10, 15 years, if not longer, those matches, even if they're not the quote-unquote main event, have to be at a certain caliber. And this felt like a step below that. This felt like an opening match on a TV show. Now, again, I'm saying that just being honest with you. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend this was a phenomenal, like, we'll get to phenomenal later. It was fine, but nobody believed that Jungle Boy was gonna win. Nobody believed it. He's not a credible challenger. And after the match is really the reason why he was on this show. So Sonata wins with a moonsault. It was a little bit anticlimactic. The fans, and we're going to get to more of that later, it kind of fell flat if you ask me. The finish here was kind of flat. After the match, because Hook was there, him and Jack Perry are walking to the back, and Jack Perry, he's all like, he's all banged up from the match. And then what happens is he turns on Hook. He clocked him. And then Taz, like, lost it because, that's Hook's son. In real life, his real name's Tyler Sinercha. Taz is Peter Sinercha. And so Jack Perry held up the FTW title and threw it at Hook because obviously that's the next belt he wants to get. So they turned Jungle Boy heel. I was not expecting that. I was not expecting that at all. I really wasn't, because when you look at Jungle Boy, he's got he's the son of Luke Perry. And he's got these good looks, and he's like a guy who can connect with a younger audience. But it feels like now they're going the direction where he's going to go heel. And it's funny because Luchasaurus is a heel right now with Christian, but yet they're going to also turn Jungle Boy. I'm not saying they're going to get back together, although that could happen, as a heel unit. But I was not expecting Jack Perry to turn. So I'm curious about where that goes. But it feels like there isn't much else they can really do with Jack Perry right now but turn him. In an era now where we don't really have the territories, you could send him to Ring of Honor. You could have him go to Japan, take a break. But it feels like Tony Khan wants to keep him around because he's a guy who he sees as the future. I'm not sure if I feel as strongly about it as he does. The guy does have, good looks, but I don't think he has main event charisma, at least not yet. Right? We'll see if I end up liking him more as a heel, because sometimes these turns can help. For example, the very next match is proof. The next match, the Blackpool Combat Club, Jon Moxley, Claudio Castagnoli, Wheeler Yuta, with Konosuke Takeshita and Shota Umino. They wrestled Hangman Page, the Young Bucks, Eddie Kingston, and Tomohiro Ishii. So, Takeshita that heel turn at Double or Nothing has done wonders for his career. Being with Don Callis is great. His work, I think, has stepped up. He's not just, generic New Japan wrestler number 15. He now has a mean streak. He's changed his style. He's much more rugged. He's much more snug. I like this Takeshita. I really do. I like what they've done with this character. This is an example of how a heel turn can actually make you. It worked for The Rock in 97. It worked for Hulk Hogan in 96, even though Hogan was always made. It sort of refreshened him. And with Takeshita, I mean, these are kind of big shoes to fill. I'm not comparing him to Hulk Hogan and The Rock. You understand that? I'm using examples that you would know about. There's tons of examples in the past. But here's a guy who was floundering as a babyface. Like The Rock was. Rocky Maivia was floundering. Turn him heel, find a new energy. It worked. This match was interesting because you had like an interesting mix of like hard-hitting, stiff, hits like from Eddie Kingston, Jon Moxley, Ishii, and Takeshita. And then you have like some of the more, and Adam Page. Then you have some of the more finesse type of moves from the Young Bucks. It was definitely an interesting sort of a combination hybrid of styles. It was effective. It was entertaining. I think the match was positioned pretty well. I did expect it to go on a bit earlier in the show, but I think it was positioned well on this card because up until this point, this was the best match of the night. I think putting the Young Bucks with Adam Page again and Kenny Omega and having them work, 6-man, 8-man, 10-man tags has done great for them because they can still do what they do in Young Bucks tag team matches, but have other guys to play off of because when you have too much of the same thing, you want to kind of mix it up a little bit. And having them work with different guys and have different types of matches, I think is a good way to do that and not have their act get old. Plus, they can interact with different guys' movesets, and that's just, it's smart. So I do commend Tony Khan for that, and of course Ghetto, because it worked here. And they obviously did a whole bunch of stuff with the history between Eddie and Claudio and Eddie and Moxley. That was the characters kind of having their problems, so to speak. I was actually surprised, though, that the baby faces won. Ishii got the pin on Wheeler Yuta, and it did kind of surprise me because I thought they were going to put more heat on the Blackpool Combat Club because they've been kind of owning the Elite, and that story's still not over yet. Hey, man, they're also building up to Claudio versus Eddie Kingston at Death Before Dishonor, so there is that. Toni Storm and Willow Nightingale, look, we live in an era now where women's wrestling is no longer the bathroom break match. This match right here was positioned as the bathroom break match. Toni Storm is the AEW Women's Champion. Willow is the IWGP Women's Champion for Strong. So when I say this was the bathroom break match, it literally was in the sense that I went to the bathroom during this match. Literally. I mean, I had no other match I wanted to go to but this one. So I went to the bathroom during this match. Not to be disrespectful. It's just, it wasn't that important. Right now, Toni Storm has bigger issues going on in the actual AEW canon without having this match. I guess they threw it in there because they felt they had to have a women's match on the show, even though New Japan doesn't really emphasize women's wrestling until very, very recently, because in Japan, the women's wrestling companies are usually separate from the men's, sort of like the NBA and the WNBA. But lately, they've been doing a lot more combo shows with Stardom and things like that. So it is kind of a thing that's a little bit newer for New Japan. But it was fine for what it was from what I saw. I didn't even see most of the match. But I'm sure if it was that great, people would have been raving about it. Nobody who I was with was raving about it, so it was what it was. Now, you want to talk about raving. Will Ospreay versus Kenny Omega 2 for the IWGP United States Heavyweight Championship. This is the rematch from Wrestle Kingdom earlier this year. Wrestle Kingdom was, to me, that match was amazing. Best match of the year so far, or at least in the running, the one from the Wrestle Kingdom before this match. And it really was because Will Ospreay sold. Will Ospreay selling in that match was just next level. You know, when you see a guy who's as spectacular as Will Ospreay, who can literally do anything in the ring, you forget that the dude, you know, maybe the dude can work. And the important thing about working is the sell. Sell is the most important thing to an old school wrestler. And to an old school fan, I mean, selling is important. And he showed that he can sell in that match. Here we have the rematch. Can they top it? Yes. They not only topped it, this is the best match of the year so far. This is the best match of the year. They topped not only the Ospreay match from Wrestle Kingdom, but in my opinion, this match topped the Okada Ospreay series. Now, obviously, this series is still they're 1-1 because Ospreay won this one. But this match blew away. This match was worth the price of admission. It, in my opinion, it blew away the Okada series and the Omega match with Ospreay in January. There's a weird chemistry these guys have. They do have natural competitive fire, and they did everything in this match. You had your brawling, you had some hardcore stuff like with weapons and things like that. You had crazy apron moves, you had near falls. It was almost too much, to be honest with you. It was almost too much. I can't say enough good things about this. This to me is, it's not just match of the night, it's match of the year, maybe even match of the decade. They busted out stuff. It was your typical match you're gonna get, where you're gonna get your near falls, you're gonna get your false finishes, all that epic New Japan stuff. This match should have probably closed the show, to be honest with you. But then they took that formula and just added to it. Don Callis was there in Ospreay's corner, of course, and he would obviously come back later to hand him a nasty wrench. There's a spot where Ospreay played the heel here, took the Canadian flag and pulled Shawn Michaels in '97, where he put it between his legs and blew his nose on it, to piss off the Canadian fans. Omega was over as a babyface here because it's Canada, and he's also the babyface in the feud. There's a part where he hit Omega with this nasty V-trigger, dude, where it was like cringe almost with how he hit him. They busted out a Spanish Fly. Will Ospreay uses the sharpshooter and gets a big pop, but then he puts him in the crippler crossface. Now, here's the thing about the crippler crossface. The fans didn't even know what to think about this because, dude, not only is he doing the crippler crossface in Canada, it's the anniversary of the Benoit murder-suicide. Today is the anniversary, yo. Today is the anniversary. He doesn't care. Ospreay does not care. Whatever it takes for heat. Then he busted out the Kawada kicks, which was, we've seen that before. But then, in this match, we saw him bust out the Tiger Driver 91, which was also a near fall. He busted out the Mitsuharu Misawa All Japan Tiger Driver 91 and got a near fall. I couldn't even believe it. That was mind-blowing. Mind-blowing stuff here. And that's not even it. That's not even all. Like, he hits. They teased the one-winged angel a lot. Even the top rope one. Didn't happen. But then at one point, Ospreay hits Omega with the one-winged angel. And Omega kicks out at 1. I don't know how I feel about that because the one-winged angel's been so protected, right? Nobody kicks out of it except for Kota Ibushi, right? And yet, Omega kicked out of his own finisher. Is it a thing where you're allowed to do that? Like, it was, I don't know, man. I don't know how I feel about that. They busted out a Liger Bomb. He hit Omega with various, I think he hit him with 2 Stormbreakers in the match. It's just, and by the way, when Omega kicked out of the one-winged angel, when he kicked out of that move, the crowd went nuts. It was crazy, just complete madness. The second half of this show was phenomenal. Ospreay is fighting back. Omega hits him with a brain buster. And then basically they started countering. And then Ospreay hits the hidden blade and the Tiger Driver 91. And then another hidden blade and the Stormbreaker for the win. It took like 7 finishers, bro, to kill Omega. Like, this was too much. So, oh man, what a crazy match, dude. These guys have some kind of magic. Just like what Ospreay's compatriarch of the UK, Freddie Mercury, would say, some kind of magic. Because this was some kind of magic. I don't know when they're going to do the third match. They could do it at All In because it's in the UK. With Ospreay having the home field advantage. It could be at the Tokyo Dome next year. They could even do both of them. I mean, they got time. They could even do another one later this year besides All In. But this series needs to continue. But if it continues more and more, they do have to put it on ice for a while because I don't know how they're going to be able to top it. I mean, without question, like, they were both fine. but there was definitely some soreness and some bruising here. Omega is on a different level, and so is Will Ospreay. Omega needed the year off, dude. He needed the year off that he took last year. He needed it desperately because he is back to being Kenny Omega of the AEW era before he banged himself up. And these matches cannot be every week. He's got to save these for the big shows, man. You got to save him for the big show, and it was worth it here. Match of the night should have gone on last. We'll get to my feelings on that in a minute. Sting, Darby Allin, and Tetsuya Naito versus Jericho, Sammy Guevara, Minoru Suzuki. These are 6 characters. 6 characters. You got You got Jericho and Sting, the WCW legends. You've got Suzuki and Naito, the New Japan legends. And then you've got Darby and Sammy, the AEW superstars, pillars who eventually want to become legends. 3 different groups of workers having the 6-man tag. Tons of characters, character stuff here. And my God, Sting. When Sting wants to turn it on, bro, he can turn it on. Seeing Sting across the ring from Minoru Suzuki made me feel weird in a good way. Sting and Jericho, this feud will continue, obviously. I think Jericho might actually be Sting's final opponent because Sting's talked about retiring this year. And that's a good final opponent to have. But there was some stuff here where I was just surprised that Stinger... remember when Sting, jumped off the balcony at Revolution? I was there for that. You see Sting do these things, and you're like, man, this dude, he's still trying to impress people. He doesn't have to do any of this, but he'll bust it out on pay-per-view. And I appreciate that. As somebody who's been a Sting fan since I was a little kid, I appreciate that. I really do. I thought that there were some fun moments, like Suzuki, Jericho, and Guevara's posing. That was cool. Darby got to do some things, but it wasn't he wasn't killing himself. This was the buffer match for the main event. But it was actually good. I would say from the Ospreay match on, the show was pretty good. But I do have thoughts about the main event. We'll get to that in a minute. But I enjoyed this. I enjoyed it. After the match, Jericho attacked Naito and Sting saved him. Don't forget that Jericho and Naito have a tremendous history in New Japan, so it was cool seeing that again. I mean, let's not forget that Jericho and Tanahashi still have an unresolved issue from 2020. The pandemic changed a lot of things, man. And I still think back, because I was in the Tokyo Dome. I was in the Tokyo Dome when Jericho wrestled Tanahashi, and I was expecting it to be a whole series, and we never got it. So many changes were made. 2020 is a weird year for me, dude. One of these days I'll talk about it, but it was a weird year. I'll talk more about it in detail. Main event. Bryan Danielson versus Kazuchika Okada. 2 of the best ever. A legitimate dream match. 2 guys who I've wanted to see wrestle each other for 15 years. Literally for 15 years, bro. It has to be 15 years. Maybe a little bit less than that, but give or take 15 years. I have been a Bryan Danielson fan since 2004. I have been an Okada fan since his rise in New Japan with the Tanahashi era. And man, the atmosphere for this, I was feeling it. I was feeling it in my gut. And then they opened the show with Bryan coming out to Final Countdown. If you are a new wrestling fan who just started watching in the mid-2010s, or if you missed Bryan Danielson's legendary Ring of Honor title run, independent title run, and I don't mean the stuff that's actually available on YouTube, I mean the stuff that you had to buy on DVD, Final Countdown was literally Bryan Danielson's theme all throughout his title run. And the theme that I think most wrestling fans of that era associate with Bryan. So him coming out to that was like when Punk came out to the AFI song at Revolution. It was very similar. Old school indie wrestling fans popped. I know I lost it. The first note, I screamed. I was like, he's coming out to Final Countdown. I couldn't believe it. So this match had to follow Omega and Ospreay. Yeah, that's tough. They did not. If any 2 guys can do it, it's these 2 guys. They did not top Omega and Ospreay. Omega and Ospreay had way too much heat. They had a pre-established storyline, and the match was just overall more spectacular and better. This match, however, felt different. This match felt like a first match between two guys trying to top themselves. They did a lot of scientific wrestling, a lot of reversals. Bryan was busting out stuff from back in the day. Okada was too. They did tease the Rainmaker a lot. Okada hit the tombstone on the outside. There was just a lot into this match, but ultimately, Bryan busted out the cattle mutilation, and ultimately, I do have problems with the finish and with the match overall. The match ended at 11:57. So I'm guessing that what might have happened was Khan didn't want to go past midnight. I get it. You buy a certain amount of pay-per-view time. Maybe it was something with New Japan. Maybe they didn't want to keep them up too late or too early or whatever. I don't even know what time it would be over there. It'd be daytime over there now, right? I don't know. I felt like they told a strong story, but this story was not enough to main event this show. Meaning, what I mean by that is, had this very same match, same move, same everything happened before Omega and Ospreay, would have been fine. Omega and Ospreay was so over the top insane that this did not live up to it. And I think with these two guys, they're the two guys who could live up to it, and it just didn't. Because the story they told here was very good, but it's not anywhere near as epic. I feel like this is the first match in a long series of matches, and they probably are saving all the good stuff for later. That's my guess on that. That is my guess. They had the story of the match was that Bryan had a bad arm because Okada worked it over. So the finish, it tied into that. He couldn't put the label lock on properly. So instead, he used like his left arm for most of the crank. And then he used his legs to kind of wrap around Okada. And Okada was pretty much trapped. And Okada tapped out. Now that to me wasn't... The crowd was shocked. I was shocked. Not just because Okada lost. I mean, that's partially shocking. I don't have a problem with a New Japan guy losing. It's just, I was surprised that it happened the way it did. But it makes sense in storyline. Okada had no choice but to tap because Bryan out-wrestled him here with the submissions. It makes sense from a storytelling perspective, but it was still not as spectacular as the Omega Ospreay. I feel like, again, match order is important. Omega Ospreay should have gone on last. This was a dream match, but ultimately it reminds me very much of the Samoa Joe Kurt Angle dream match at Genesis and TNA. I was in the building for that, and the match was not that good. It was about 12 minutes. It was fine for 12 minutes, but it was not what everybody was expecting. However, the rematch at Turning Point the next month was 10 times fucking better. I love the rematch. Great match. This one, honest to God, man, I love these two guys to death, but it was a bit of a letdown. Maybe I was expecting too much because I've been following these dudes for so long, but it was a bit anticlimactic, and I still think that I know these guys can bust out a better match, but this is the beginning of a longer story, I think. I think there's going to be a story here that's going to continue. I think we're probably going to see Okada and Bryan in the Tokyo Dome, and I feel like whenever that happens, I think that'll be when they really crank out the good stuff. And I hate to say that to the Toronto fans who may have felt robbed, because the match was still good. It's just on a card with an Omega Ospreay match that's like 10 stars, even a match that's this good psychologically is just not going to be able to touch it. So Omega Ospreay was the match of the night. This is probably the second best, but it was anticlimactic. And I'm sure there'll be a story coming out of this. I'm sure of it. Anyways, those are my thoughts. Take care. I like the show. Don't know if I liked it more than last year. I guess it was probably a bit better than last year. But I really wish they would have moved the order around, because then I would have left this show super happy. Those are my thoughts. Take care.